The great chamber of Vareth Prime had stood for 10,000 years, and in all that time, it had never heard laughter like this. Ambassador Kethvora of the Silathi stood at the center of the circular hall, his forearms folded across his chest as the representatives of 12 spacefaring species laughed at the images floating before them. The images showed humans small, soft creatures with no natural armor and no claws and no venom glands and no telepathic abilities and no exoskeletons and nothing that would suggest they belonged among the stars. They call themselves humanity, Kethvoran said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen 1,000 species rise and fall. And they have achieved faster than light travel exactly 37 cycles ago. The Morven delegate, a massive creature covered in thick scales and standing 3 meters tall, snorted through his breathing slits. These things, he said, pointing one clawed finger at the hologram of a human male. They wish to join the Galactic Concord as equals. More laughter filled the chamber. Kethvoran raised one of his hands and the room fell silent because when a Silathi ambassador raised his hand, even the Morven listened. I have studied these creatures, he said. And he pressed a button that brought up streams of data around the human images. And I must share what our assessment teams have discovered. The data told a sad story. Humans lived for barely 100 cycles if they were lucky. While most Concord species measured their lives in thousands of cycles or more, humans needed to consume organic matter multiple times per day or they would weaken and die. While many Concord species could go weeks without sustenance, humans needed to enter an unconscious state called sleep for nearly a third of their existence, or their minds would begin to fail. Humans could be killed by temperature changes that other species would barely notice, by invisible organisms too small to see, by falls from heights that would merely annoy a Morven child. Their homeworld, Kethvoran continued, is classified as a Category 7 death world, filled with predators and disasters and diseases that should have killed them long ago. The Valesi ambassador, a being of pure energy contained in a crystalline shell, flickered with curiosity. Then how did they survive at all? She asked. Through desperation, Kethvoran answered. Through crude tools and pack behavior and a stubbornness that borders on the irrational. But this does not make them strong. It makes them survivors of a terrible circumstance. Nothing more. He waved his hand and the hologram changed to show human. Cities and human ships and human technology. Their weapons are primitive chemical propellants and crude nuclear devices that they somehow have not yet used to destroy themselves. Their ships are held together with metal alloys that we abandoned centuries ago, and their understanding of quantum mechanics is laughable at best. The chamber murmured with agreement in the back of the room. A young Silathi analyst named Vela watched the proceedings with her datapad clutched in her secondary arms. She had been part of the assessment team, and something about the human data had been bothering her for weeks, while the ambassadors laughed and dismissed these strange soft creatures. Vela scrolled through the historical records her team had gathered from human archives. What she saw made her primary heart beat faster. The humans had a word they used constantly in their history texts, a word that appeared more than any other concept in their cultural records. The word was war, not conflict, which every species experienced and not dispute, which was natural among any thinking beings. But war, a concept so total and so absolute that the Concord had no true equivalent. Vela had found records of humans fighting each other for thousands of cycles before they even left their homeworld, not for territory or resources in the normal sense, but for ideas and beliefs and things that could not be touched or measured. She had found images of human cities reduced to ash and human populations decimated by weapons of their own creation and human soldiers marching into certain death with something in their eyes that her translation software could only render as determination. One record in particular haunted or it showed humans splitting the fundamental building, blocks of matter itself, and creating weapons that could destroy entire cities in a single flash of light. And then, knowing what these weapons could do, they had built thousands more and pointed them at each other. Any sane species would have destroyed such weapons immediately. The humans had kept them ready to fire for decades. Vela raised her hand to speak. But Kethvarn was already moving to the vote. "I recommend we grant humanity protected species status," he said. "They are clearly too fragile and too primitive to participate in Concord affairs, but they have achieved spaceflight, which means they fall under our responsibility to guide and shelter." The vote was unanimous. Humanity would be protected, which in Concord terms meant they would be ignored and patronized and kept away from anything important until they either evolved or went extinct. As the ambassadors filed out of the chamber, Vila approached Kethvarn with her datapad extended. "Ambassador," she said, "I found anomalies in the human historical data that I believe warrant further study." Kethvarn barely glanced at her. "What kind of anomalies?" "Their pattern of conflict is unlike anything in our records," Vela said. "They have been at war with themselves almost continuously for their entire existence as a species. And the methods they use—" "Young one," Kethvarn interrupted, his voice patient but dismissive. "Primitives fight among themselves. It is what primitives do. The Morven had clan wars before they achieved unity. The Valesi had energy disputes before they learned cooperation. This is simply the way of young species. But the scale," Vela pressed, "and the totality of their approach, I have never seen anything like it in any other species record. They do not fight to establish dominance or to resolve disputes. They fight to destroy, completely and utterly. They—" "Enough," Kethvarn said, and his voice carried the finality of an ambassador who had made up his mind. "Humanity is a protected species, fragile and primitive, and of no consequence to the Concord. Your report is noted and filed. Now return to your duties." Vela watched him walk away, and she looked down at her datapad one more time. On the screen was an image from human history. Soldiers standing in the ruins of a destroyed city, their faces covered in dirt and blood, their eyes showing exhaustion beyond measure. But they were still standing, and they were still fighting. Something cold moved through Vela's heart as she wondered what it would take to break creatures like these, and whether the galaxy truly understood what it had just dismissed as weak. The chamber doors closed behind her, and somewhere across the stars, humanity received the news of their protected species status. They did not protest. They simply smiled and said thank you and returned to their work. And if anyone had been watching closely, they might have noticed that the humans did not seem surprised or offended at all. They seemed like they were waiting for something. The first warning came from the edge of known space, a single automated beacon screaming into the void before it went silent forever. Then came the refugees. Ships of every design and every species came pouring through the jump gates, their hulls scarred and their passengers terrified. And they all carried the same message. Something was coming. The Concord called an emergency session. And for the first time in 3,000 cycles, the great chamber of Vareth Prime was filled with fear instead of politics. Admiral Tarvax of the Morven stood before the assembly, his scales still blackened from battle, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had just witnessed the impossible. "We call them the Kadex," he said, and the hologram behind him showed creatures that made even the bravest ambassadors recoil. They were like insects, but wrong. Twisted things with too many legs and mandibles, that dripped with acid and eyes that held no intelligence that any Concord species could recognize. They moved in swarms so vast that they blocked out the light of stars, and where they passed, they left nothing but dead worlds stripped to bare rock. They came from beyond the galactic barrier, Torvax continued, from somewhere we have never explored and never wanted to explore. And in the 18 cycles since first contact, they have consumed the Verati colonies and the Morvan outer territories and the Keshan homeworld. The chamber erupted in chaos. The Keshans were gone. An entire species of 7 billion souls, eaten by these things in less than a cycle. Our fleets engaged them at the Battle of Terminus Gate, Torvak said, and his voice cracked for just a moment. 12,000 Morvan warships, the greatest fleet ever assembled in Concord history. We followed every protocol and every honorable rule of engagement. He paused. 600 ships survived. The Kadex adapted to our tactics within hours. They learned our weapons and our strategies and our weaknesses faster than any enemy we have ever faced. And they do not negotiate, and they do not retreat, and they do not stop. Ambassador Kethvar rose from his seat. What do they want? He demanded. Territory and resources and technology, we can negotiate. We have always been able to negotiate. Torvax looked at him with eyes that had seen too much. They want to feed. He said simply, that is all they want. They consume everything organic and move on to the next world. There is no negotiation because there is nothing to negotiate. We are not their enemies. We are their food. The Kadex pushed forward through the following months, and every battle was a slaughter. The Concord species had been at peace for so long that they had forgotten what real war looked like. Their conflicts were ritualized and honorable, and governed by rules that both sides agreed to follow. The Kadex did not follow rules. They attacked civilian transports and medical stations and refugee columns with the same ferocity they showed to military targets. They used their own dead as weapons and shields, and sometimes as bait. They felt no fear and showed no mercy, and learned from every engagement. Vela watched the reports come in from her new posting on a Sulathi intelligence vessel, and she remembered the human data she had tried to show Kethvaran 18 months ago. The humans had been quiet since receiving their protected species status, building their colonies and expanding slowly into the territories the Concord had assigned them, and most of the galaxy had forgotten they existed at all. Then the Kadex came to human space. A scouting swarm of perhaps 10,000 Kadex vessels jumped into the system containing the human colony of New Brisbane. And according to Concord protocols, the humans should have evacuated immediately and called for Concord protection. That was what protected species were supposed to do. Governor Elena Vasquez did not evacuate. The first transmission from New Brisbane reached Vela's station 6 hours after the Kadex arrived. And it was not a distress call. It was a battle report. Vela watched the footage with her heart pounding, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. The humans had not waited for the Kadex to attack. They had gone out to meet them with ships that should have been destroyed in seconds. Crude vessels made of metal and powered by primitive fusion drives. But the humans did not fight the way the Concord fought. They did not form battle lines, and they did not follow engagement protocols, and they did not seem to care about their own survival at all. They flew their ships directly into Kadex formations and detonated their reactors. They launched missiles filled with radioactive material that poisoned entire swarm clusters. They rammed their vessels into Kadex hive ships with their crews still aboard. They used themselves as weapons. The battle lasted 4 days. And when it was over, New Brisbane was burning, and 60% of the human defenders were dead. But the Kadex swarm was destroyed, every single one of them. Vela stared at the final casualty reports with something between horror and awe. The humans had lost 12,000 soldiers and 47 ships. And they had killed 10,000 Kadex vessels that should have swept through their entire system in hours. More importantly, they had captured 3 Kadex specimens alive. No one in the history of the war had ever captured a Kadex alive. The Concord demanded to know how they had done it. And Governor Vasquez sent back a single message that would change everything. We have been fighting things that want to kill us since we climbed down from the trees, she said, her face covered in blood and ash and exhaustion. The Kadex are just the latest in a very long line. Send us your refugees and your wounded. We will take care of them and stay out of our way. We have work to do." The message spread across the galaxy like fire, protected species. The Concord had called them too weak to fight and too primitive to matter, but the humans had done what 12,000 Morven warships could not. Vela pulled up the old data she had tried to show Kethvoran, the records of human wars and human weapons and human determination, and she finally understood what she had been looking at all along. The humans were not weak because they were fragile. The humans were terrifying because they were fragile, and they knew it, and they had spent their entire existence learning how to fight anyway. They did not fear death because death had always been their constant companion. And now they were ready to introduce the Kavex to an enemy unlike anything that Swarm had ever faced before, an enemy that would not stop until one side or the other was completely and utterly destroyed. The emergency summit was called within days of the New Brisbane victory, and for the first time in Concord history, a human was invited to address the full assembly. His name was Marcus Cole, and he walked into the great chamber of Vareth Prime like he belonged there. He was not tall by Morven standards, and not elegant by Silathi standards, and not impressive by any measure the Concord used to judge worth. Just a middle-aged human with gray hair and gray eyes and a face that seemed carved from stone. But every ambassador in that room felt something shift when he entered. Vela watched from her position in the analyst section as Cole took the center platform, and she noticed that he did not bow or make any gesture of respect to the assembled representatives. He simply stood there and waited for them to stop talking. Ambassador Kethvoran was the first to speak. "Ambassador Cole," he said, and the title sounded strange when applied to a human. "The Concord congratulates humanity on your victory at New Brisbane. It was unexpected and impressive." Cole said nothing. "We have called this summit to understand how your forces achieved what our greatest fleets could not." Kethvoran continued. "What weapons did you use, and what tactics did you employ, and what secrets of the Kavex did you discover that we missed?" Cole looked around the chamber slowly, his gray eyes moving from face to face with an expression that Vela could not quite read. "You want to know our secret," he said finally, and his voice was quiet, but somehow it filled the entire chamber. "I will tell you, but I do not think you will like it." He pressed a button on his datapad, and a hologram appeared behind him, showing images from human history that made several ambassadors gasp. Cities in ruins and bodies piled in mass graves and mushroom clouds rising over burned landscapes, and soldiers standing in trenches filled with mud and death. "This is our history," Cole said. "This is what we did to each other before we ever reached the stars. We have been at war with ourselves for 10,000 years. And in that time we have learned things about conflict that your species have never needed to learn." Admiral Torvax leaned forward. "What things?" he demanded. Cole turned to face him. "You fight wars to win," he said. "You form your battle lines, and you follow your protocols, and you count your victories and defeats like points in a game. When one side has enough points, the war ends and everyone goes home." He paused. "We do not fight wars to win. We fight wars to end them." The chamber was silent. "When humans go to war," Cole continued, "we do not stop until the enemy is destroyed, or we are destroyed. There is no surrender that we will accept, and no treaty that will satisfy us, and no outcome except total victory or total defeat. We call this the doctrine of totality." He changed the hologram to show more images, weapons and strategies and concepts that the Concord translation system struggled to process. "We developed something called Scorched Earth, which means destroying everything of value in territory we cannot hold, so the enemy cannot use it either. We burn our own cities and poison our own wells and salt our own fields rather than let them fall into enemy hands." Several ambassadors made sounds of disgust. "We developed something called guerrilla warfare. which means hiding among civilian populations and striking without warning and disappearing before the enemy can respond. We do not wear uniforms or follow rules or fight fair because fair fights are for people who can afford to lose. The Valesi ambassador flickered with alarm. We developed something called mutually assured destruction, which means building weapons so terrible that using them would destroy both sides completely. And then we pointed those weapons at ourselves and lived under their shadow for decades. Not because we wanted to die, but because we wanted the enemy to know that we would rather die than submit. Kethvorin rose from his seat. "This is barbarism," he said, his voice filled with horror. "This is not warfare. This is madness. No civilized species would ever—" "No," Cole interrupted, and his voice cut through the ambassador's words like a blade. "This is survival. Your species have never faced extinction. You have never known what it feels like to have your back against the wall with nowhere left to run. You have never had to choose between your principles and your existence." He stepped closer to the center of the chamber. "We have made that choice 1,000 times. And every time we chose to exist, no matter the cost, no matter the horror, no matter how much of ourselves we had to sacrifice." He looked directly at Kethvorin. "You have been fighting the Kathex for honor. You engage them in proper battles and follow proper protocols and die in proper ways. And they have eaten 3 of your member species while you maintained your dignity." His voice dropped lower. "We will fight them for extinction. Theirs or ours, and there is no third option. We will use every weapon and every tactic and every horror we have ever invented. And we will not stop until the Kathex are gone or we are." The chamber was absolutely silent. Vela felt cold spreading through her body as she understood what Cole was really saying. The Concord had been fighting a war. But the humans were going to fight something else entirely. Something that did not have a name in any Concord language, because no Concord species had ever been desperate enough to invent it. Cole turned and looked directly at her section. And for just a moment, his gray eyes met hers. "You thought we were weak because we die easily," he said. "But that is exactly why we are strong. A species that expects to live forever can afford to be careful. A species that knows it will die has nothing left to lose." He smiled. And it was not a pleasant expression. "The Kathex have conquered 3 galaxies, because no one has ever been willing to pay the price to stop them. We are willing to pay it. The only question is whether you will help us or stay out of our way." Admiral Torvax stood slowly. "What price?" he asked. "What are you willing to do?" Cole turned to face him. "Whatever it takes," he said simply. "We will burn worlds and poison stars and commit acts that will haunt us for generations. We will become the monsters that your children tell stories about, and when it is over, either the Kathex will be gone or we will be." He looked around the chamber one final time. "That is the human way of war. It is not honorable, and it is not civilized, and it is not something we are proud of, but it is effective, and right now, effective is the only thing that matters." He walked out of the chamber without waiting to be dismissed, and the doors closed behind him with a sound like a death knell. Vela sat in the silence that followed, and she realized that she was afraid not of the Kathex anymore, of the humans who had just offered to save them. The Concord tried to put conditions on human involvement in the war. Rules and protocols and limitations that would keep the conflict civilized. The humans refused every single one. Ambassador Cole was clear when he addressed the Council. "We will fight our way, or we will not fight at all. You can give us your refugees and your wounded and your prayers, but you will not give us orders. We have 200 years of galactic warfare to catch up on, and we do not have time for your committees." The Concord had no choice but to agree 3 more species had fallen to the Kathex in the months since New Brisbane, and the swarm was pushing toward the core worlds with unstoppable momentum. Humanity entered the war on their own terms. Vela was assigned as liaison to the human fleet, the first Scilothi to serve alongside these strange soft creatures. And what she witnessed in the following months would haunt her dreams forever. The humans did not form a single unified fleet like the Concord expected. Instead, they broke into hundreds of smaller groups and scattered across KVEX territory like seeds in the wind, striking without warning and vanishing before the swarm could respond. They called it guerrilla warfare, and it drove the KVEX commanders insane. A swarm would move toward a target system, only to find that human ships had already been there, poisoning the asteroid fields with radioactive debris and seeding the space lanes with mines and leaving behind automated weapons platforms that activated the moment KVEX vessels came close. The humans used decoys constantly, filling ships with nothing but explosives and sending them toward KVEX formations, letting the swarm capture them and then detonating them from light years away. They used refugee ships as bait, broadcasting distress signals that drew KVEX hunters into ambush zones where human fleets waited in silent darkness. When Vela expressed horror at using civilians as lures, the human commander she was assigned to just looked at her with those strange soft eyes. "Those ships are empty," Commander Sarah Chun said. "The refugees are safe on our colony worlds. We just kept the ships and filled them with antimatter warheads." The KVEX cannot tell the difference between a ship full of terrified families and a ship full of explosives. She smiled. Yet, the humans developed weapons, specifically designed to hurt the KVEX in ways that went beyond physical damage. They studied the captured specimens from New Brisbane and discovered that the KVEX operated through a hive mind, a psychic connection that linked every drone to every queen and allowed the swarm to coordinate across impossible distances. So the humans built weapons that attacked the mind. They called them psi-disruptors. And when they were activated, they flooded KVEX communication channels with chaos, random impulses and contradictory orders, and something the humans called psychological noise. Vela watched a KVEX battle formation fall apart when a psi-disruptor hit them. Thousands of vessels suddenly flying in random directions and crashing into each other and firing on their own. Allies the swarm had never experienced confusion. Before they had never experienced fear, but the humans taught them both. The most disturbing thing Vela witnessed was not a battle but a briefing. Commander Chun stood before her crew and explained a new operation, a mission to infiltrate a KVEX hive ship and plant a biological weapon in the Queen's chamber. The weapon would release an engineered virus that would spread through the hive mind connection, killing every KVEX that shared psychic space with the infected Queen. It would potentially kill millions of KVEX with a single strike, but the infiltration team would not survive. The virus needed time to spread before the KVEX could purge it, which meant the team had to hold the Queen's chamber until they were overwhelmed. It was a suicide mission. Vela expected the humans to draw lots or force their lowest-ranked soldiers to volunteer. The way Concord species handled such situations instead, the commander asked for volunteers. Every single human in the room raised their hand. Chun had to turn people away because too many wanted to go. Vela approached one of the selected soldiers afterward, a young woman named Rodriguez, who could not have been more than 25 cycles old. "You know you will die," Vela said. Struggling to understand, Rodriguez shrugged. "We all die," she said. "The only question is whether it means something. Those KVEX killed my brother on Keshan Outpost. This means something to me. The mission was successful. The virus spread through 3 hive queens before the KVEX managed to sever the psychic connections, killing approximately 4 million drones and crippling an entire sector of their invasion force. None of the infiltration team survived. The humans held a memorial service that night, and Vela watched as Commander Chun read the names of the dead and the crew stood in absolute silence. There were no tears and no dramatic displays of grief. Just quiet respect and absolute determination when the service ended. Chun turned to Vela. "They will be remembered," she said. "And what they bought us with their lives will be used. We do not waste our dead." The war shifted after that. The KVEX had conquered 3 galaxies because they adapted faster than any enemy they faced, learning from every battle and evolving new tactics within hours. But the humans adapted faster. Every engagement taught them something new about KVEX psychology and KVEX biology and KVEX weaknesses. And unlike the Concorde, the humans were willing to use that knowledge without hesitation or moral reservation. They poisoned food worlds that the KVEX had targeted, rendering the organic matter toxic to the swarm. They seeded systems with stealth drones that broadcast psi-disruptor signals constantly, creating zones of space where KVEX could not coordinate. They sent captured KVEX drones back to the swarm with modified neural implants that spread chaos through the hive mind like a disease. The KVEX, for the first time in their long history of conquest, began to hesitate. Vela intercepted a KVEX communication that made her blood run cold. A message from a hive queen to the central intelligence that controlled the entire swarm. The message was a single concept, repeated over and over. What are they? The KVEX did not understand what they were fighting anymore. The other species they had consumed were prey. Simple creatures that fought to survive and fled when the odds turned against them and could be predicted and countered and destroyed. The humans did not behave like prey. They behaved like something the KVEX had never encountered. Something that did not fear death and did not retreat and did not stop, no matter how many of them died. Ambassador Cole broadcast a response to the KVEX message, sent across every frequency the humans could reach. "We are what happens when you corner something that has nothing left to lose." The word spread through the galaxy like fire. And for the first time since the war began, the Concorde began to hope. But Vela noticed something that the others did not seem to see. The humans were not just fighting the KVEX. They were becoming something else in the process. Something harder and colder and more frightening than the species that had been dismissed as weak and primitive just a few years ago. She wondered if the galaxy would recognize them when this was over. She wondered if they would recognize themselves. 2 years of war had changed everything. The KVEX had been pushed back from Concorde space. Their great swarms reduced to scattered clusters fighting desperate holding actions across 100 systems. The humans had done what no species in 3 galaxies had ever accomplished. They had made the KVEX afraid. Vela stood on the bridge of the human flagship Unconquered as it led fleet of 10,000 vessels toward the coordinates that had cost millions of lives to obtain. The KVEX homeworld. Admiral Marcus Cole stood at the center of the command deck, his gray eyes fixed on the view screen as stars streaked past in ribbons of light. He looked older than he had at that first summit, his hair whiter and his face more lined, but his eyes were exactly the same. "Hard and cold and absolutely certain, Admiral," Vela said quietly. "The KVEX Queen Mother has broadcast a message. They are requesting negotiation." Cole did not look at her. "What do they want?" Vela checked her datapad. "They are offering to withdraw from this galaxy entirely. They will return to their space beyond the barrier and never come back. They ask only that we spare their homeworld." The bridge fell silent. Vela saw human officers exchange glances, and for just a moment she thought she saw something like hope in their eyes. The war could end. No more death and no more sacrifice and no more turning themselves into monsters. Cole was quiet for a long moment. "Show me the casualty reports," he said. An officer brought up the data. 47 billion dead across the Concorde 6 Concorde. Species completely extinct. 3 human colonies wiped out, including New Brisbane, which had fallen in the second year of the war when the KVEX returned. In force, 18 million human soldiers dead. Cole looked at the numbers for a long time. The KVEX have consumed 3 galaxies, he said finally. 3 galaxies full of species we will never know, civilizations we will never meet, histories that are gone forever. He turned to face Vela. If we let them go, they will rebuild, they will adapt, they will learn from what we taught them. And in 1,000 years or 10,000 years, they will return. And the next galaxy they consume might not have humans to stop them. Vila felt cold spreading through her body. So your answer is no? Cole nodded. My answer is no. He turned back to the view screen. All ships, prepare for a final approach. Arm the Prometheus device. Vela knew what the Prometheus device was. The humans had built it in secret, using technology they had never shared with the Concorde. A weapon so terrible that even the humans had argued about whether to create it. It was a star killer, a single warhead that could trigger a chain reaction in a star's core, causing it to go supernova within hours. The KVEX homeworld orbited that star, Admiral, Vela said, and she was surprised to hear her own voice shaking. There are billions of KVEX on that world. Not just soldiers, but their young and their queens and their entire civilization. Cole looked at her with those gray eyes. I know. This is not war anymore. Vela said, this is extermination. This is genocide. Yes, Cole said simply. It is. He did not look away. The KVEX have committed genocide against uncountable species across 3 galaxies. They do not surrender, and they do not change, and they will never stop. The only way to ensure they never threaten anyone again is to end them. Completely and utterly. He paused. I told your Concorde at the beginning that we would pay whatever price was necessary. This is the price. I will carry this weight for the rest of my life. And so will every human who survives this war. He turned back to the view screen. But the KVEX will not. The fleet emerged from hyperspace above the KVEX homeworld. A planet covered in hive structures and breeding chambers and the accumulated history of a species that had existed for millions of years. The KVEX threw everything they had left at the human fleet. Desperate swarms clawing at the invaders with suicidal fury. But it was not enough. It had never been enough. The Prometheus device launched at 0347 hours. Ship time. Vela watched as the warhead struck the star and vanished into its corona, and for a few moments, nothing happened. Then the star began to change. It swelled and brightened and shifted colors, going from yellow to orange to angry red as the chain reaction spread through its core. The KVEX homeworld had 6 hours before the supernova reached it. Vela thought about the billions of KVEX down there. The queens and the workers and the young that had never hurt anyone. And she felt sick in ways she could not describe. But she also thought about the Keshans and the Morvans and the countless species the KVEX had consumed. And she understood why the humans had made this choice. The supernova was beautiful in a terrible way. A flower of light and fire that bloomed across the system and vaporized everything in its path. The KVEX homeworld was gone in an instant, along with everything that lived there and across the galaxy. The remaining KVEX swarms collapsed. The hive mind that had connected them for millions of years went silent, and without it they were nothing but animals, confused and disorganized, an easy prey for the fleets that hunted them down over the following months. The war was over. The Concorde held a ceremony on Vareth, primed to honor the species that had saved them. But the celebrations were muted and strange. Ambassador Kethvorin stood before Admiral Cole and formally welcomed humanity as full members of the Concorde. But his voice shook as he spoke. Everyone in that chamber was thinking the same thing. The humans had saved them, but the humans had also shown what they were capable of. Weapons that could kill stars and Tactics that showed no mercy and a willingness to commit horrors that the Concord could barely comprehend. They looked at humanity differently now. They looked at them with fear. Vela found Cole on the observation deck of a human station after the ceremony, staring out at the stars with a glass of something amber in his hand. She stood beside him in silence for a long moment. "Do you regret it?" she asked. Finally, Cole did not answer immediately. "I regret that it was necessary," he said. "I regret that there was no other way. I regret what we had to become to survive." He took a drink. "But I do not regret that we are still here. And I do not regret that the Kvex are not." Vela thought about the question she had been afraid to ask. "What happens now?" she said. "The Concord is afraid of you. They see what you did to the Kvex, and they wonder if you might do it to them someday." Cole smiled, and it was a tired, sad expression. "Good," he said. "Let them be afraid. Let them remember what we are capable of when pushed. Maybe then they will make sure we are never pushed again." He looked at her. "We did not want to be the monsters, Vela. We never wanted any of this. But we have always known what we could become if we had to." He turned back to the stars. "That is the burden of being human. We carry the knowledge of our own darkness everywhere we go. We see the monster in the mirror every morning. And we spend our lives trying to be something better." Vela stood beside him and looked at the same stars. She thought about the species she had watched evolve over the past 2 years. The soft, fragile creatures who had shown the galaxy what real strength looked like. They were not weak. They had never been weak. They were the most terrifying thing the universe had ever produced. A species that knew exactly how terrible they could be and chose to be better anyway. Most of the time, the Concord dismissed you as primitives. She said quietly, "We thought you had nothing to offer. We thought you were too fragile to matter." Cole nodded. "You were wrong." He finished his drink and set the glass down. "We are all of us capable of great good and great evil. The difference is not strength or intelligence or technology. The difference is what we choose to do with what we have." He looked at her one final time. "The humans chose to save your galaxy, even though it cost us pieces of our souls to do it. Remember that when you write your histories, remember that we could have been the monsters, but we chose to be the shield." He walked away, leaving Vela alone with the stars. She stood there for a long time, thinking about everything she had witnessed and everything she had learned. The humans had rewritten the meaning of war, and the galaxy would never be the same. Far below, on worlds across 1,000 systems, the survivors of 100 species looked up at the sky and wondered what kind of future awaited them. A future protected by creatures who had proven they could destroy anything that threatened what they loved. A future where humanity stood watch among the stars, carrying the weight of their own darkness so that others might live in the light. It was a strange kind of hope, but it was hope nonetheless. And that was the most human thing of all.